Welcome to the Internet History Podcast. I'm your host, Brian McCullough. So usually I don't like to post two episodes back-to-back about the same topic. I like to split it up just a little bit. But last week's discussion about SoundCloud got a pretty great reception, and right as I was posting it, another great piece about SoundCloud was posted on Buzzfeed by the great Ryan Mack, who's one of the best tech reporters out there. So, in a rare attempt to be topical, I guess, today's episode is a follow-up, a discussion with Ryan Mack about his article called The Inside Story of SoundCloud's Collapse. And hopefully we're going to fill in some of the details about some of the things that Christina and I were speculating on last week. So please enjoy the continuing SoundCloud saga with the great Ryan Mack. Ryan Mack, thanks for coming on the Internet History Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So last week, Christina Warren was on the show, and we had this great conversation about SoundCloud. And like the very next day, you dropped this amazing story in BuzzFeed. So I really appreciate you being willing to come on and talk about that, because it really fills in some of the pieces about what we were talking about. I guess my first question would be, I think you talked to like a dozen SoundCloud people. Like, are they eager to talk at the moment, or did you sort of have to talk them into talking?
I think it's like I lost count, but it's more than a dozen at this point. Mm-hmm. And I've talked to some people after the stories come out. But yeah, when these things happen, there's so many people out there that kind of run the gamut of like, do they want to talk to the press or do they not want to? And so the interesting thing that happened when these people got laid off most recently, there was 173 people, I think, and they were all in this spreadsheet. I don't know if that was talked about, but one employee had put together this spreadsheet of SoundCloud employee or former SoundCloud employees that were looking for a job, and so they sent it out to like recruiters and had all the contact information on there. So I just started pinging people through that, and it was an amazing reporting research that I had little legwork in that, because like people's emails were right there, and so some people didn't respond. Some people said they didn't want to talk. At some point, I started getting a view into like some like internal Facebook private groups, and people were like discussing like should we talk to the press, should we not? But usually you find a good group that wants to talk, especially with so many people out there.
Is it generally a thing where like everybody's got their own version of what went wrong, or is there generally consensus on what might be going wrong at SoundCloud at the moment?
Well, everyone has their own story, and employees are oftentimes like siloed in their like groups, mm-hmm. and especially with such a like international company. I mean, it was employees were spanned across Berlin, which was the main office, New York, San Francisco. They had a couple people in places like Australia, and other places in Europe. London was another office. So everyone had their own like kind of view on what happened, but the overarching themes I tried to capture and put it all together in like a compelling narrative. So,
I guess the biggest question is, in my mind, why they decided to go ahead and try to mimic people like Spotify and do their own streaming service. Because you even say in the piece that for years the founders said that they didn't want to do that. That the strategy of trying to be ad supported was going to allow them to be, quote, free and open and stuff like that. So do we have any sense of why they pivoted and tried to do streaming?
So I want to like go back and like, because that's the question I always had. I mean, I approached this as like an avid user of SoundCloud. Like even, I remember using the thing back in like 2011, 2012, and like finding DJ mixes and remixes that you couldn't find anywhere else on the web. And I wrote a story when I was at Forbes on the company in 2013 around that idea of like, well, SoundCloud is this very unique web property that has all this stuff that you just can't find on Spotify or iTunes at the time, or even Pandora. And at some point it changed. I mean, at some point they made a conscious decision to go after this kind of music streaming market and get these kind of label catalogs. And a lot of people in the company, or at least formerly at the company, thought that was a huge mistake because they were sacrificing what made them unique in favor of kind of chasing this established way of doing things in the music business, but not so much like differentiated to Spotify. And that was a huge mistake. And a lot of people see that them doing that as a result of like pressure from the labels. Labels have this this way of doing things. They've pretty much every streaming service has the same price that's been instituted in terms of subscription, whether that's Tidal or Apple Music or Spotify. And a lot of people think SoundCloud's hand was forced in this whole like situation.
So you're saying that from the label's perspective, they're thinking, oh, great, here's another platform. Let's sign them up for our existing scheme, and that was maybe the motivation?
Right. Here's another platform with a couple million users or millions of users. They're making a lot of money, so we want to get in on that action because they're monetizing content that our artists are putting out, whether that's through remixes or even just like pirated songs that are uploaded to SoundCloud. We should get in on that action, but how are we going to drive revenue from them long term? And so let's make sure that they also have this kind of streaming stuff going that these other guys have.
Well, I mean, if you look at the chronology, it seems like that pivot also happened after they had their last really successful venture round raise. So is there any suspicion that maybe it was investors that were like, "Hey, stop playing your little game over here that you haven't been able to monetize. Go with what works." Do we have any sense that might have been part of it?
I talked to some investors, and I mean, and the board is always like has to sign off on these decisions, and they're aware of these things. And so there is some responsibility of the board that, in terms of this decision making. But at the end of the day, it was the wrong decision, whether you want to place that blame on the CEO or the board or the labels, because it kind of really just destroyed the uniqueness of the property.
So they launch SoundCloud Go, I guess, March of last year. Do we know what the uptake has been on that? Like how successful or not successful it's been?
I spoke to an employee who left, I believe, September of 2016, and I believe at that time it was in the hundreds of thousands of users or signups. I'm sure it's gone up recently, but if you compare that to, I think Spotify is 50 million now. Apple Music is a bit further behind, but it's in the tens of millions, if I remember the last number correctly. I don't have them in front of me. Hundreds of thousands is not going to move the needle, and they're going to have to sign up a lot more in order to have impact there.
In your piece, there's a couple of different instances of also sort of like internal strife that you mentioned. There's that Jeff Toig or something.
Jeff
Toig that's brought in, and some of the SoundCloud employees referred to him as a bully, but he's only brought in because it seems like the main founder, Alexander, I mean, he already seems to have this reputation of, posting Instagram pictures of parties and private jets. Is some of it from the SoundCloud people? Can some of the blame maybe be placed at the feet of, like, Alexander's just at various times hasn't been paying very much attention or had much commitment to SoundCloud?
Well, it was certainly their hiring decision, right? They hired this guy who they thought could come in and help them, make them more. He was brought in basically to handle label negotiations as well as to provide structure to the business. He had past experience working with the labels at a company that was called Move Music, which is on, I think, was like a app that was preloaded on Cricket wireless phones. And he was kind of seen as internally as like he doesn't think like us. He's not an artist, but he's a business guy, and he's going to help us get these deals done. And Alex really brought him in. Alex and Eric, the two co-founders, brought him in to do that. And it ultimately didn't work out. And in fact, it was a disaster by a lot of employees' recollections. So, and not just because he couldn't sign those deals, but because of the culture stuff that we can go into later. And some of the blame has to be placed on the co-founders for hiring someone that just was not the right fit and couldn't do his job.
I do get the impression you mentioned the culture from some of the people that you quote, that it is sort of like there's several. It's a company of two or more minds, where there's people within the company that joined it because they liked that early community aspect that SoundCloud has sort of turned away from, and then there's other people that have been like, we've got to find the business model, that sort of thing. So is that also possibly what's going on? Is that it's just there's not everyone's rowing in any particular direction at all?
Yeah, and I think you always get that kind of conflict. Like as companies grow, they have to monetize, and some of the earlier employees who were brought in because they like the community feel of it, feel kind of isolated or alienated as the company moves in a different direction. You get the same thing with like users, early users. Hey, I love SoundCloud's DJ mixes. Why are you guys running ads now? Like that doesn't make any sense to me. Like everything has always been free. So things change, and people, their moods certainly change, and their views on the company certainly change. And but yeah, Toig was brought in at this time where the culture was definitely shifting. They started hiring salespeople to drive ad sales for this new product, this new ad platform called On SoundCloud, which was basically a revenue-sharing service with their creators. And he was brought on to kind of get that going, as well as like finally hammer out deals with the labels so they don't get sued by the big three. Which was always also another threat that was hanging over their heads at any given time.
I'm not even tangentially connected to the music business, but if I decided to get into the music business, the first thing I would know is that negotiating with the record labels is notoriously a difficult thing to do. So again, it's almost like, how did you not think that was going to be difficult? Like you say in the piece that one of the things they didn't anticipate was that it would take years to land these deals. How did they not anticipate that?
Exactly. I mean, you got to remember SoundCloud was founded in 2007-8, so like they've been in it for so long, and you would think that they would be aware of this like impending like showdown with the labels. And yeah, it was a question I asked multiple times, like to everyone, like how are they not ready for this, and why didn't they have their kind of things in order before going to labels? And the labels were notoriously hard to negotiate with. I mean, this was an anecdote. I don't know if it made it in the story or not, but at some point, someone at the company had like mentioned, "Oh, we're going to launch on SoundCloud on August 2014, and that's going to be a revenue sharing platform, and we're going to have all the majors on it. So all three majors are going to be launching with us." In fact, they had timed an interview with the New York Times to go with this launch, and when the story went out, they would have all three labels on board. And the labels heard that and said, "Well, that's a negotiating tactic in our favor. Like, we know you guys have to get this done by this point, and we're going to twist your arm because you guys have put a date on it." And when that launch came around August 2014, none of the majors were signed. In fact, it took a couple months for even one of them to get on board. And it was a huge embarrassment in the company, huge embarrassment for people like Jeff Toig, who had been brought in to do that deal, and they had to pivot and completely change their launch. And if you look at the launch language around that time, they focused on indies, and they were like, oh, we've always been a independent platform for independent artists, and this is why we're launching for independent artists. But internally, there was huge amounts of strife for missing on closing a deal with any of the labels for that launch.
Well, that almost we said earlier, the labels. Here's just another platform. Let's sign them up to our existing model. But that almost makes me think. Do you have any sense whether consciously or subconsciously, maybe the labels don't want SoundCloud to succeed? Maybe they're spooked by the nature of this sort of surfacing new artists for free, and that's sort of like a threat to their model or something.
Possibly, but they're also at the time they're realizing that iTunes sales are shrinking, no one's buying CDs, streaming is definitely the way to go. But they had a certain view on streaming, and streaming had to be on their own terms, and it had to be in this $9.99 a month streaming service that people pay subscriptions to, right? So I don't necessarily think they were afraid of it, but I don't know if they knew what to do with it. And it took them a while to kind of come to terms with it. And by that time, negotiations were hammered out by, I think the last label came on mid-2016, and around the time of the launch of SoundCloud Go, the other services had taken so much of the pie that there was really nothing left for SoundCloud.
Well, so as Christina and I talked about several times, the obvious analogy for SoundCloud is to YouTube, and obviously YouTube is saved by the Google acquisition of YouTube, and so Twitter makes a run at SoundCloud. It was just the price issue that made that ultimately not happen?
A couple things, yes. Twitter comes in. I know so Twitter at the time, you have to realize they were really going into this music push. They had hired I think Ticketmaster executives, and the idea was to musicians and artists were some of the biggest power users on Twitter. They wanted to have a complete experience so that they can connect with their fans, and so that was a motivating reason why they wanted to go look at SoundCloud. And I think this was, I think 2013, 2014. And I know that executives were meeting, and Twitter just missed on Instagram, and they didn't want to miss on the next big property. And so negotiations went pretty far along, and SoundCloud really was holding out for around a $2 billion valuation. At some point, I think it was in May of 2013, I think is the date, Twitter stock is crashing. They think the price is way too high, and they don't know what to do with the legal risk. I mean, at this time, SoundCloud had no deals in place with the majors. And so because they had those, there was still a lot of stuff up in the air. And I mean, SoundCloud was so confident that Alex Young, was the CEO, was calling people and saying we're gonna actually have the deal signed this day on May 19th. You guys should be ready because we're gonna sign the papers. And by the end of that day, the deal had basically collapsed.
Did you get a sense from the people you talked to that was, they sort of missed their shot there? Internally at SoundCloud, did they feel that was their shot and they blew it?
I don't know if they thought that was their only shot, but they were certainly devastated. I mean, people really thought this was going to happen. It was so close, and Alex and Eric, when they missed on this deal, were devastated, according to someone that I talked to. So, yeah, it was tough, but I don't know if they thought it was their only shot. Acquisitions get missed all the time. So.
Right. Well, actually, speaking of that, how close did they get to Spotify buying them? They
were close, but at the time with Spotify, they weren't really negotiating from a position of strength.
Right.
And, there were already talks about it having issues with signing deals. And they were close to Spotify. I mean, so close that executives were visiting each other both offices. Alex knows Daniel Ek fairly well. They're both Swedish, and obviously both have very successful audio streaming companies. But a deal just never got hammered out. Again, Spotify was, as it says in the story, was kind of afraid of doing a deal that large ahead of going public.
The where are they? What's their status now? We know that they just had these layoffs, and then there's the rumors that they've got like basically a couple months left of cash. Do we know any more about like what the status is at this moment?
Yeah, they're frantically trying to do deals, and it's a pretty fast-moving situation. So I don't know. By the time this podcast comes out, I think they might have already closed deals. But when we ran the story, we were hearing that they were trying to raise like $100 million or north of $100 million to kind of keep the company afloat. Mm-hmm. Bloomberg has since reported that they're trying to sell stakes to Temasek and Rain Group, the private equity firm, and that would essentially, once those stakes are sold off, give away majority control of the company to those two entities. Although I don't know the status or if those two deals have been completed.
But it sounds like it's another round or someone taking a piece. But you haven't heard any rumors of an outright acquisition by somebody.
No, they're selling off pieces, but again, if you give up majority control, I think. Yeah. I mean, Alex and Eric and their current shareholders no longer have like ultimate decision making over that company.
So, final question is probably an unfair one, but if you had to give me odds, what are the odds that SoundCloud 6 months from now will still be an independent entity that actually exists?
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I think the thing I'll go on a tangent here, but the thing that was really kind of just like sad to see is like when the layoffs got announced, like there were rumors floating around like would people's SoundClouds like material get like deleted, like what would happen to like my profile, and like a lot of people were just like scared that it would just like disappear. I don't think that's the case. I think there's still like a lot of value in the asset, and I think they'll probably pull together deals where they'll stay afloat. But yeah, it depends. I mean, they now have these label deals in place. I'm sure they'll kind of reorg, and I mean they've already started to reorg, and maybe they shift their focus. They said they're going to go back on focusing on creators as opposed to this last 2 years is focusing on listeners.
Right, so maybe pivot right back to the model that they should have stuck with to begin with.
Yeah, you might see them get rid of the SoundCloud Go product, the streaming, mm-hmm. But then they lose a significant revenue stream, I guess. So yeah, it's hard to say. We reported that they're already kind of considering what to do with Alex, whether that's removing him and elevating him to a chairman role. So that remains to be seen what happens with that as well.
Well, Ryan, thanks for a really great piece, and thanks for coming on the show and adding more details to this.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me.
If this is the first time you're listening to this podcast, please subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice. There's plenty more great internet history where that came from. And if you're a longtime listener, then you know what to do to help us out. Rate and review us on iTunes. Because iTunes gives credit to reviews and ratings, and the more great reviews we get, the more people will discover us. As always, there's more info on our website, www.internethistorypodcast.com. The show's Twitter handle is @NetHistoryPod, and my personal Twitter is @BrianMCC. Thanks for listening.